Hello students, welcome to a session on economy this week wherein we'll be taking some of the very important articles that have appeared in various business related newspapers and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 5th August to 11th August 2019 and the articles that I've chosen are from Business Line, Hindu, Business Standard, Indian Express, Live Mint. Let's begin this particular discussion. The first article is on the CAG report related to off-budgeting. CAG very recently has submitted a report which was discussed in Parliament, and apart from this, CAG also gave a presentation to 15th Finance Commission on the concept of off-budget financing. Now, what is the concept of off-budget financing? What is the importance of it? And what are the issues or concerns which have been raised by CAG is the gist of the article. Let's have a discussion related to that. Off-budget financing is one of the practices which has evolved in case of Indian economy over a period of time. It basically means that Government of India will circumvent the process of a budgeting concept. Now, usually in case of a budgeting, what happens is the government will present a document to the Parliament that we call it as a budget session. During this particular session, a document will be submitted. It will be passed. This will allow the government to withdraw the money from Consolidated Fund of India. This is a basic concept. Now, it basically also means that Government of India is accountable to the Parliament with respect to its expenditure. Now, what happens in off-budget financing is this. Let's say Government of India wants to incur an expenditure of 100 crore rupees in the form of food subsidy. But in the budget, it basically allocates 60 crore rupees to FCI to incur in the form of food subsidy. And remaining 40 crore rupees will have to be borrowed from the market by FCI. I'll repeat the statement here. The total expenditure to be incurred is 100 crore rupees, but Government of India allocates 60 crore rupees out of this to FCI, and remaining 40 crore rupees FCI will have to borrow from the market to incur the total expenditure or food subsidy of 100 crore rupees. But nevertheless, please understand this. This borrowing done by FCI will have to be repaid in the future. By whom? By Government of India. Now, the logic which has been applied by Government of India is this year, the money that is there with the government is very limited. And we are also incurring capital expenditure. So, we'll have to allocate certain money for that also. So, there is certain limit on how much money we have got. So what we'll do, we will ask FCI to borrow from the market and we will pay this particular amount along with the interest in the future. This is one way of off-budgeting. Same can also be done in case of oil marketing companies, where again Government of India will incur fuel subsidy. That is basically in case of fuels such as kerosene, LPG, there is a component of subsidy. Let's say in case of the subsidy expenditure this year, the actual expenditure is again, let's say hypothetically 100 crore rupees. Government of India would have allocated 70 crore rupees, but actual expenditure is 100 crores. So there is again extra expenditure incurred of 30 crore rupees. Government of India basically tells these particular OMCs to borrow this particular 30 crore rupees from the market. And this particular 30 crore rupees will be paid to the OMCs by the government in future or in the coming years. This particular basic concept is called as rolling over of subsidy. That is, Government of India tells these OMCs that this 30 crore rupees will be rolled over to the next financial year when it will be paid to this particular OMCs. So understand this, Government of India follows this particular concept of off-budget financing in order to ensure that appropriate expenditure is incurred, but the burden on the government to allocate this particular expenditure is reduced. Now, what is the advantage? Advantage is Government of India can control its fiscal deficit, can allocate appropriate expenditure in the form of capital expenditure, so on and so forth. But having said so, certain concerns have been raised by various experts as well as the CAG. Some of the concerns are: one, off-budget financing in the recent years has actually increased. And this particular practice basically means that you're trying to circumvent the budget process which has been provided under the constitution. That is basically before Government of India incurs an expenditure or withdraws the money from Consolidated Fund of India, it has to take the permission of the Parliament. But when they incur the expenditure in the form of off-budget financing, there is no requirement of the permission from the Parliament. So it is circumventing the process of budgeting. Second, yes, the fiscal deficit which is recorded for this year is lesser. Doesn't mean that Government of India is not going to incur this particular expenditure. In simple terms, in case of the example that I've given here, that is in case of FCI, I said Government of India will repay the remaining 40 crore rupees in the coming years. So basically in the next couple of years, Government of India will have to incur this particular expenditure. That is another concern. Third, just in order to reduce or suppress the fiscal deficit, the last couple of years, the Government of India has gone on this particular spree of off-budget financing. And as per CAG report, the total off-budget financing expenditure incurred by the government is around 3 trillion rupees. And if this particular 3 trillion rupees is included as part of fiscal deficit, then the actual fiscal deficit will balloon from 3.3% budget estimates to 6% as per CAG calculation. Okay, understand this? The Government of India in the recently concluded budget has stated that fiscal deficit for this particular fiscal will be 3.3% of GDP. But CAG report basically states that it will not be 3.3%. It will be around 6%. So that will basically balloon the fiscal deficit numbers, which will have a negative impact on the Indian economy. And moreover, in case of off-budget financing, Government of India is not directly borrowing, but it is allowing the public sector enterprises to borrow from the market, which basically means that yes, there is a very high demand from the government as well as the public sector enterprises for borrowing in the market, which will basically push up the interest rates in the market. These are some of the concerns which have been raised by various experts as well as the CAG report. Having said so, Government of India has countered this particular CAG report with certain arguments. What are the arguments? One, they have basically stated that as per FRBMA, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. I'll repeat it. Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. There is no requirement for the government to give the details to the Parliament with respect to off-budget financing. I'll repeat the statement. As per FRBMA, Government of India is not under any kind of a condition to give details to the Parliament with respect to the off-budget financing. Second, under FRBMA, it has basically stated that the government has to give the Parliament the information related to fiscal deficit. And in the calculation of fiscal deficit, the same act also says that off-budget financing need not be involved or included. These are the two very important arguments given by Government of India with respect to FRBMA. Apart from this, it has also stated that in the present budget, that is the budget which has been presented for this particular fiscal, Government of India has already made a huge amount of allocation to take care of the borrowings done by the government under the concept of off-budget financing. And fourth very important argument that the Government of India has given is the fiscal deficit that has been calculated by CAG in this particular respect is very much subjective. So these are some of the very important points related to this particular article. Based on this, let's have a look at a question. Consider the following statements. As per FRBMA, the off-budget financing is part of the fiscal deficit numbers given by the government? No. Understand this, there are two terms here. One is debt of the government and the second one is fiscal deficit of the government. In case of FRBMA Act, fiscal deficit numbers will not involve off-budget financing done by the government. Whereas the debt of the government, which basically refers to the borrowings of the government, will involve or will include the off-budget financing also. So this is a basic difference. First statement is wrong. Second statement, as per a provision of FRBMA, the government has to submit a report to the parliament on its off-budget financing. Again, wrong. This has been demanded by CAG. CAG in its report has stated that Government of India, whenever it practices this particular concept of off-budget financing, should submit a report to the parliament as to how much of its borrowings are in the form of off-budget financing, which are the public sector enterprises which are borrowing, how much are they borrowing, what is the liability, so on and so forth. All this particular information should be given under the concept of a framework which has to be submitted by the government to the parliament. This is a recommendation given by CAG. So both the statements are wrong. Right option will be option D. Both are false. One descriptive question based on the discussion. Write a critical note on the off-budget financing, 250 words. Please understand this. In the last week's discussion also, I've given you a question on off-budget financing. And even in this week, I'm giving you a question. Both the questions are slightly different. For a simple reason, in the last week, the question was straightforward. Write a note on off-budget financing. And this week, it is a write a critical note on off-budget financing. You will have to focus on what are the advantages or the benefits of off-budget financing, what are the concerns or issues related to off-budget financing, and you'll have to write a way forward. These are the three very important headings that you will have to mention in this particular article. So these are the questions related to this article. The next article is related to IBC and Operational Creditors. Now please understand, in the last couple of months, there has been a lot of discussion that has been happening with respect to the concept of IBC, specifically surrounding the concept of a creditors under IBC. Now basic concept of a creditor is the one who has given loan or who has been involved in lending activities. Now under the concept of lending, there are two types of creditors under IBC which are recognized. One is called as a financial creditor, and the second one is called as operational creditor. The basic difference between both of them is this. Financial creditors usually give a loan at a lower rate of interest, whereas operational creditors give a loan at a higher rate of interest. Financial creditors usually collect a collateral. Operational creditors do not collect a collateral. What is the meaning of collateral? Security. So look at this. These are the two very important differences between financial creditors as well as operational creditors. Apart from this, under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, whenever the claims of a financial creditor as well as operational creditors are submitted to Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that is, under this, will be submitted to National Company Law Tribunal, a higher importance is given to the claim of a financial creditor compared to operational creditor. I'll explain it again. Under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, whenever the claims of financial as well as operational creditors are submitted to NCLT, a higher importance is given to the financial creditors compared to operational creditors. What is the meaning of this? Let's say hypothetically, there is a bank which has collected a collateral and has given loan to a company X. And in the same way, there is also another financial institution, let's say A, which has given loan to X, but it has not collected any kind of a collateral in this case. Now, under the concept of IBC, A is considered to be an operational creditor and B is considered to be a financial creditor. Let's say hypothetically B has given a loan of 100 crore rupees and A has given a loan of 50 crore rupees. Now under the IBC, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, both of them will have to submit their claims to NCLT. The claim of Bank B will be given a higher importance compared to the claim of any other operational creditor. That is the meaning of this. If I want to expand on this, it basically means this. X will be sold to, let's say, a buyer in the market Y, and when Y buys this particular company X, he will have to pay certain money. How this particular money will be distributed is the basic concept of the priority waterfall. And under the priority waterfall, understand this, amongst operational and financial creditors, the first preference is given to financial creditors, then it is given to operational creditors. Again, this is only related to financial as well as operational creditors. So basically, this is a concept of operational and financial creditors. Now, what is the point of discussion here? Very recently, in case of SR Steel case, NCLAT, National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, held that operational creditors will have to be given an equal treatment compared to financial creditors with respect to their claims. And this particular ruling of or order of NCLAT was challenged in the Supreme Court. Apart from this, Government of India has amended the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or it has proposed an amendment. Under this particular amendment, it has clearly mentioned that in case of the claims, the financial creditors' claims will be given a higher importance or priority compared to the claims of the operational creditors. This is actually what is happening in the current affairs. This article discusses some of the very important points related to operational creditors only. That is, it mentions that 1. More than 50% of the cases which have been filed with NCLT, that is National Company Law Tribunal, have been filed by operational creditors themselves. First point. Second point. In case of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, so far many of the cases have been resolved, and this article states that the recovery of the operational creditors has been higher compared to the recovery of the financial creditors. Now, what is the meaning of recovery here? Let's assume a bank B has given a loan of 100 crores to company X, and under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, if the bank can collect back 60 crore rupees out of this 100 crore rupees of the debt, I'll basically say that recovery of the bank is 60%. So this article mentions that 1. Majority of the cases which have been filed under NCLT have been filed by operational creditors, and second, recovery of operational creditors has been higher than the recovery of financial creditors. Apart from this, this article also mentions certain very important points as to why the financial creditors must be given a higher importance compared to the operational creditors. These are as following. 1. Usually, the operational creditors are against the idea of liquidation of a company. What do you mean by liquidation? The company will be broken down and the components of the company will be sold to buyers in the market so that they can collect the salvage value. I'll repeat the statement here. The operational creditors are naturally biased against the concept of a liquidation of a company. And since they are biased against liquidation, if they are part of the committee of creditors, then it might be very difficult to take a decision in interest of the creditors. What is the meaning of committee of creditors? Please understand, under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, a bank, let's say X, has given loan to a company A. Company A doesn't repay, then the bank will drag company A to NCLT. Now NCLT will appoint an insolvency professional and a committee of creditors is set up. As of now, in case of committee of creditors, the financial creditors have the right to vote, whereas operational creditors do not have any of the voting right. Now, if operational creditors are also involved in committee of creditors as well as given the right to vote, this is the first point. They are against liquidation. They might vote against the concept of a liquidation. Hence, it might be very difficult to take a decision in the interest of the creditors. Second, the number of operational creditors are very, very high, and the interest of the operational creditors are also varied. And when the operational creditors are given the right to vote in the committee of creditors, it might be very difficult to collect the claims from all of them. It will be time consuming, it will be expensive, and more importantly, since the interest of the operational creditors are different, very difficult to bring all of them on the same page. These are some of the very important points which have been discussed in this article, and the idea which has been mentioned in this particular article is that whatever is the structure which is present in India as of now, that is, in case of committee of creditors, only the financial creditors are given the right to vote. It is the correct structure. It should be continued. To buttress this argument, they've also mentioned that in other countries, such as Britain, the operational creditors are also given the right to vote in the committee of creditors. But the recovery of these particular operational creditors has still remained low in these particular countries. Whereas in case of India, the recovery of operational creditors has been higher compared to the recovery of the financial creditors. So these are the points being discussed in this particular article. Now, based on this, let's have a look at a question. Consider the following statement regarding Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Operational and secured creditors have the voting power in the committee of creditors. Wrong. In priority waterfall, claims of financial and operational creditors are given equal importance. No, in case of priority waterfall, the financial creditors claims are given a higher importance or priority over the claims of the operational creditors. So both the statements are wrong. Right option will be option D. Both are false. Apart from this, I have also given a descriptive question related to the IBC amendment which has been proposed by Government of India. The question is, write a critical evaluation on IBC Amendment Bill 2019 in 250 words. Now, let's have a look at reviving the investment in the Indian economy. In the last couple of months, there is this particular point of a slowdown in the Indian economy or slowdown in the growth of the Indian economy. Now, first of all, you need to understand what do you mean by slowdown. Please understand this. Slowdown essentially means there is a GDP growth rate, but this particular GDP growth rate is actually declining. I'll repeat the statement. Slowdown means that there is a GDP growth rate, but this particular GDP growth rate is actually on the decline. This is called as a slowdown. If I want to give you an example, very simple example, let's say hypothetically the GDP of India is 100 crore rupees. It will increase from one financial year to the next financial year to 110 crore rupees, to 115 crore rupees, to 116 crore rupees in the next financial years, like this. If I move from one financial year to the next financial year, yes, there has been increase in the GDP, which means there is a GDP growth or positive GDP growth. But the growth rate that you will calculate from one financial year to the next financial year is actually on the decline. If I move from this year to this year, if I move from first year to the second year, the GDP growth rate is how much? 10%. If I move from second year to third year, the GDP growth rate falls down to somewhere just over 4%, and again it will keep on declining. This is a concept of a slowdown in the economy. Now the question is, how do you revive the growth rate in case of India? How do you ensure that rather than declining GDP growth rate, there will be increasing GDP growth rate in case of Indian economy? The article discusses this particular concept. In the recently concluded budget, one of the very important focus points was with respect to investment in infrastructure. The finance minister basically discussed the concept of investment in infrastructure, which will basically lead to capital formation, which means there is GDP growth rate. This is one point. Second point, if there is investment in infrastructure, jobs will be generated, and when jobs are generated, the consumption expenditure will also increase, which means again there is a demand for goods and services in the market, which essentially means what? GDP growth rate is happening. This is also referred to as what? The virtuous cycle in the economic survey. Have you understand this? What the finance minister discussed was investment in infrastructure, and what they essentially mean is this particular cycle. Invest in infrastructure, jobs will be generated, demand will increase, growth will also increase, means again what? Jobs will be generated. This is a virtuous cycle which was discussed even in the economic survey. Now, if investment has to be done, either it has to be done by the government, that is public sector, or it has to be done by the private sector, such as companies or firms. This particular article discusses the issues in investment in India. The objective is what? To revive the growth in the Indian economy. To revive the growth, you need to invest. Now, who should invest? Either it has to be a private sector, it has to be the government. What are the issues related to the investment in India is being discussed in this particular article. Let me give certain very important points which are discussed here. Let me start with the public sector investment. Government of India, if you have seen the budget or even if you have read the analysis of the budget, the focus is on fiscal prudence. And one of the ways of improving fiscal prudence is by reducing fiscal deficit or controlling the fiscal deficit. So Government of India as of now is majorly oriented towards the controlling of fiscal deficit. And when there is focus only on fiscal deficit, very difficult for the government to invest in infrastructure. Because please understand, under the concept of a budgeting, government will incur expenditure in the form of the revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure. In case of the India's budget, what we have seen historically is whatever is the estimated revenue expenditure, the actual revenue expenditure is much higher. And since there is a higher revenue expenditure, to control the fiscal deficit or keep the fiscal deficit under control, Government of India majority of the times reduces its actual capital expenditure, or it transfers the expenditure from the capital head to the revenue head. So basically this is what has been seen. Hence the technical statement will be like this. The fiscal space that is available for the government to increase the investment is very limited. So government has very limited space to invest in the infrastructure. So that is one point. Second, what about the private sector then? What this particular article says is, in the last couple of years, the policy of the government, some of them have been done in order to promote the private investment. But apart from this, some of the other policies also have been taken by the government which will negatively affect the private investment, such as very recent announcement of increase in the import tariffs on some of the imports. Now, apart from this, the article also says that to attract the private sector investment, you will have to open up some of the very important sectors. Two sectors which have been discussed in this particular article are, one, the coal sector. India historically has been consuming huge amount of coal, but majority of the coal that is produced in India is done by Coal India Limited. Now the argument is, yes, you are producing huge amount of coal and you have nationalized this particular sector, but despite having huge amount of coal reserves, you end up importing coal from rest of the world. So the argument which has been put forward in this article is, why don't you throw open this particular sector or allow the private sector entities to come into this particular sector and start producing or mining huge amount of coal in the market. Again, one example. Second example that has been quoted in this particular article is the sector of power. Government of India in the last couple of years has implemented a host of reforms in order to reduce the stress on the power sector. For example, Government of India has implemented UDAY, Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana. But in the recent surveys which have been done with respect to this particular scheme or Yojana, it has been seen that it has not given the expected results. I'll just quote one fact here. With respect to UDAY, Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, the discoms, that is distribution companies, were supposed to bring down the aggregate technical and commercial losses to 15% by 2018 and 2019. But a recent survey has shown that rather than dragging down this to 15%, we are still at a very high level of 18% plus. So basically, yes, UDAY has given certain results, but these particular results are not satisfactory. So the argument is, in that case, why don't you allow the private sector entities to participate in the power sector, especially in the distribution chain? So these are some of the arguments which have been given with respect to private sector investment in the market. And the gist of this argument is what? Because of these particular policies, the private sector investment has been on decline rather than being inclined. Third is public-private partnership. So I've discussed public sector, very little space. Private sector, investment is declining. What about PPP, public-private partnership, where government or the public sector entity as well as the private sector entity will come together and will implement these particular projects. The issues with respect to these particular sector or this particular model of investment are these. One, in the last 5 years, the PPP projects have actually declined in case of India. Second, whatever projects were announced earlier, these particular projects are facing issues such as land acquisition. Some of the policies of the Government of India are negatively affecting these particular projects, credit availability, so on and so forth. Third, in case of the PPP, as per Niti Aayog report, majority of the projects which are implemented are in roads sector. Understand this? As per this particular report of Niti Aayog, more than 80% of the projects which are implemented under PPP are in the roads sector itself. Fourth, the Government of India, to revitalize this particular segment, set up a committee headed by Mr. Vijay Kelkar in 2015. And this particular committee has given recommendations, but these particular recommendations have not been implemented effectively. So look at this. On one side, Government of India has very little space to revive the investments or invest more in the market. On the other side, private sector investment is getting affected. The third PPP model is also on the decline. So the question is, how do you revive the investments then? How do you ensure that this particular virtuous cycle will start functioning in the Indian economy? Two very important recommendations which have been given by this particular article are: one, Government of India needs to implement certain reforms, but more importantly, these particular reforms should be structural in nature. Second, whatever reforms are implemented by Government of India should be front loaded, meaning usually the governments have got this particular practice of implementing the reforms when the elections are around the corner. Rather than waiting for the elections, government should announce these particular reforms as soon as possible. These are the two very important recommendations which have been given in this particular article. Now, let's have a look at the next article. This is related to monetary policy transmission. Very recently, the Monetary Policy Committee conducted the monetary policy review for the month of August and has announced a certain very important changes. One of the very important changes that was announced by the Monetary Policy Committee is to reduce the interest rate or repo rate by 35 basis points. This is an unconventional monetary policy announcement, but nevertheless, the Monetary Policy Committee announced to reduce the repo rate by 35 basis points. As a result of this, the repo rate has fallen down to 5.4%. Now, after this announcement was made, RBI Governor basically stated that it is time for the banks to have a better or an efficient monetary policy transmission. Now, what is the meaning of monetary policy transmission? Now, basic concept is the RBI will lend to banks and banks will lend to borrowers or customers in the market. If RBI reduces the repo rate, in what way this particular rate cut will be transmitted to the borrowers in the market? In simple terms, with the reduction in the rate of interest or repo rate in this case, how much of the credit will be issued or how much more credit will be issued to the borrowers in the market? The argument which has been put forward by RBI is this: with the reduction in the repo rate, the lending activities of the banks at lower rate of interest should increase. This particular basic concept is called as monetary policy transmission. Please understand, as of now, the banks follow a concept of MCLR, marginal cost of a funding based lending rate. I'll repeat it, marginal cost of a funding based lending rate, which they use to determine the interest rates that they charge on the loans that they give to borrowers. Earlier, we followed a concept of a base rate regime. From the base rate regime, we have shifted to MCLR regime from 1st April 2016. Under this, the banks will have to consider certain parameters before deciding the lending rates. Now, what are these particular parameters? One, is there any change in the marginal cost of the funds? Second, what is the operational expenditure? Third, what is the profit motive? Fourth, the premiums or tenor premium. Let me explain these particular four parameters. Basically, bank will borrow from multiple lenders in the market. It will borrow from RBI, it will borrow from households, it will borrow from companies or firms. Now, from these particular sources, the banks will borrow. And whenever one source reduces its rate of interest, that is, if repo rate is reduced by RBI, it basically means that the cost of funds for the banks is reducing marginally or by a slight rate of interest. This particular reduction in the lending rate should be deciding or should be affecting the lending rate decided by the bank. First. Second, bank will incur certain expenditure in order to collect the deposits, in order to maintain the activities, in order to lend and recollect the money, so on and so forth. For all of this, they will incur the expenditure which is called as an operational expenditure. Third, for having conducted these particular activities, banks will expect to generate certain profit. And finally, tenor premium, banks will lend to different people at a different tenures, that is different time, and this particular tenure should also determine or should also affect the lending rate by the bank. This is a concept of MCLR, that stands for marginal cost of funding based lending rate. Now this particular article discusses that now with the announcement of a reduction in the repo rate by 35 basis points, 4 banks have announced that they will be externally benchmarking their lending rate. What is the meaning of this? These particular 4 banks are Bank of India, Syndicate Bank, Allahabad Bank and Union Bank of India. What they have basically announced is henceforth their lending rates will be decided based on the repo rate. Let's say hypothetically repo rate is 6%. Now in case of external benchmarking, the banks apart from considering repo rate will also consider parameters such as operational cost, profit motive, tenor premium, and will say apart from 6% will also consider 8%, which basically means that if I borrow 100 rupees from RBI, I will have to pay 6% to RBI under repo rate, and when I collect this 100 rupees and lend it in the market, I expect to generate apart from 6%, 8%. Okay, understand this? And this particular 8% is because of operational cost, profit motive as well as tenor premium. So the base rate here will be how much? 14%. And based on this particular base rate of 14%, different borrowers will be charged with a different rate of interest as per this particular concept of external benchmarking. Now this particular concept was recommended by Janak Raj Committee. Remember this. Concept of external benchmarking was recommended by Janak Raj Committee, and RBI has stated that it is considering the concept of an external benchmarking. But these particular 4 banks have gone ahead and have stated that they have already linked their lending rates to repo rate, which is nothing but the concept of external benchmarking itself. So these are some of the very important points mentioned in this particular article. Now based on this, let's have a look at a question. What is or are the purpose or the purposes of marginal cost of funds based lending rate, MCLR, announced by RBI? Now with introduction of MCLR, basically RBI wanted to achieve 2 very important objectives. One, whenever the banks will decide their lending rate, it should be as much transparent as possible. Second, whenever RBI will change its lending rate, the monetary policy transmission should be efficient. Third, whenever a borrower takes a loan from a bank, the rate of interest charged by the bank should be fair. These were the 3 very important objectives with which RBI introduced the concept of MCLR. Let's look at the points here. These guidelines help improve the transparency in the methodology followed by the banks for determining the interest rates on advances. Yes. These guidelines helps ensure the availability of a bank credit, the interest rate which are fair to the borrowers as well as the banks. Yes, both the points are correct. So the right option will be option C, both 1 and 2. So these are some of the very important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for this particular time period. Thank you. Have a good day.